Hello! Welcome to our first live stream from the Bisexual Index. We're going to be talking about bisexual activism, bisexual history, and questions you might have about what it's like being bi, particularly in the UK. Now, this is our first stream, so if you could do me an immense favour, one of the people who's watching, and tell me if you can hear me. That would be absolutely fabulous. Just pop a comment in the box, because this is the first time I've done this, and I am a little nervous. Let me have a look at the analytics and stream settings. None of them suggest anything's wrong, so who knows? Who indeed knows? But anyway, hello. Thank you for joining us. If you're watching this on playback, then I will have put in timestamps through this so you can skip ahead of all this waffle and just cut straight to the good stuff. I'm getting people saying that they can indeed hear me, so that's brilliant. I'm really pleased to see that. Hello to John and hello to Barry, who are joining us live at this very moment. Everyone's saying it's all great. Wonderful. Well, let's get started. Hello, my name is Marcus Morgan, and I'm the chair of the Bisexual Index. I've been a bisexual activist since 1992, when I first started going along to a bisexual group in London, met other bisexual people, and very rapidly became involved in the running of the organisation. The community was a revelation to me. I had not previously found people like me that I could spend time with, I could talk to, that I would be able to communicate with or find any kind of kinship with. I didn't feel at home in what we would now call the straight community, which is to say pubs and clubs, nightclubs. I wasn't into sport. I didn't have any connections there. And when I went out on the gay scene, as it was definitely the gay scene then and not an LGBT scene, it didn't feel right. I felt like I wasn't fitting in. I felt like a bit of a fake and a phony. And then I discovered that there was a bisexual community. And one of the questions that we've been asked and that I'd like to talk a bit about today is, how did that community start? And how has the way that that community started influenced what we have today? Now, the gay community, as distinct from the bi community, the lesbian community, or the trans community, the gay community's origins are much older. Men would secretly meet up in pubs that were sympathetic to homosexual men, to make friends, find partners, watch entertainment that celebrated their lives. This goes back hundreds of years, and the gay scene, the LGBT scene we have in the UK today, is very much the child of that. It's pubs, and there's an entertainment on for you to go and ostensibly watch while you're chatting to people, hoping to make connection. And that always had bisexual people at it. Because, of course, before the 1990s, gay was an inclusive term. If somebody in 1992 had said to me, "Are you gay?" I would have replied, "Yes, I'm bisexual." By the year 2000, if somebody said to me, "Are you gay?" I would have said, "No, I'm bisexual." And the way that's changed has made it really interesting to be bisexual in the LGBT community, and it's one of the reasons why a separate bi community has had to form. So let's talk a little bit about how that formed. So the question is, how did the UK bisexual community start? See my mouse on there, move that out of the way. How did the UK bisexual community start, and have its origins influence the shape of the community. Now, the gay community wasn't a very good place to meet other bisexual people. You generally wouldn't say to people, oh no, I'm actually bisexual. Because one of the great myths about bisexuals is that we will, of course, leave you for someone of the opposite gender to you. Now, it might be that to the individual bisexual, the gender of their partner and the gender of their subsequent partner is about as important as what, sort of opera they like or what their favourite recipe is. But to people who aren't bisexual, it feels important, gender. So these weren't good places to meet and talk about bisexuality. But in 1980, the anti-sexist men's newsletter had a couple of articles about bisexuality in it, and they ran a conference, the men's anti-sexist conference, which was, I think admission was 25 pence or something like that in 1980. And this was on the 15th of February. And they had a session there about what it was like being a bi man. And this was the first time for everyone in that room that they'd been in a space that was majority bisexual. Now, if you are an activist or if you're involved with the bi community in any way, then you will have had this exact same experience. It doesn't change over the years. The very first time you realize you are in a room where not everyone is the same, but they all lack one key difference. You can look around the room and take it as a given that everyone, or close to everyone, is neither gay nor straight. That this is a space where if you said you were bisexual, it's kind of almost redundant to do so. It's not a big announcement. And that's an immense load off the mind. And just as anyone joining the bi community today has that moment of, oh my gosh, everyone here's just like me, or more like me than they normally are. So too, the people in this session at the Men's Anti-Sexist Conference in 1980 had pretty much the same sort of thought. And so some of them got together, organised by a gentleman called David Burkle, and they sent out publicity to the various newspapers and magazines for gay men and so on at the time, saying we're going to set up a bisexual group. And so on the 1st of September 1981, 40 years ago this year, the London Bisexual Group had its first meeting. It was at Heaven nightclub in London, same place as it is now, but before it opened for the evening, they had a side room, and they had 80 people, pretty evenly split gender-wise, and they all sat, talked, and met other bisexual people, in many cases for the first time in their lives. So the origins of the bi community were, although this was the side room of an alcohol serving venue, very much not centered around just drinking and watching the entertainment while trying to work out who you're going to chat up. It was much more, oh my God, you're bisexual, I'm bisexual. Have you noticed that? Or do you find that? Or what's it like being bisexual and a parent? What's it like being bisexual and married? Or married to someone who isn't bisexual? What's it like being bisexual in a relationship with someone who's gay? It was a place to come and get answers to questions, much like this is a place to come and get answers to questions. But it was big on discussion. It was all about finding out about bisexuality. And so the focus was very much on discussion and topics. And this led them to do the next thing, which was significant, which was to think, well, if London is happy to talk about this, What about the rest of the UK? Other bisexual groups were going to be forming around the country at this time, but the people at the London Bisexual Group said, we would love to have the discussion on a wider basis, so we're going to do what we think is the next thing. Having been at men's anti-sexist conferences, they very much had that sort of mentality about, well, we're going to have, you know, workshops and sessions, and we're going to recreate the sort of discussions we have at the LBG, London Bisexual Group, over the course of, you know, a day or so. And so they had a conference, and it was called The Politics of Bisexuality. Very grandiose title. It had, I think, 40, 50 people. And that was the 8th of December 1984 in the Factory Community Project in North London. And the title very much set the tone. This was somewhere to discuss the meat of what it's like to be bisexual in a political world. Politics, whether it's big P or small p in your head. Sexual politics, so how bisexuality interfaces with the homosexual community at the time, what it's like being bisexual and a woman and dating lesbians, what's it like being bisexual and facing prejudice. And words like biphobia hadn't really been coined at that point. But it very much set the tone, the politics of bisexuality. This was a serious event. There was going to be no, I don't know, Jello wrestling on a bouncy castle, or drinking competitions, or disco. And 6 months later, they had another one. They decided this was fantastic. We met so many connections. There's groups forming after this all across the country, using the same model. We're going to meet up with alcohol not as the primary focus. Might go to the pub afterwards, or if we're upstairs, might go down to the bar afterwards. But we're going to meet up, we're going to discuss, we're going to talk about these things. And many people, through these sort of discussions, could then find friends, find partners, but it wasn't primarily aimed at picking people up. Because if you wanted to meet somebody of the, as they would have said, opposite gender to themselves, they could have gone out into mainstream society and done that. If they wanted to find a partner who was of a similar gender to themselves, they would have gone out to a gay venue. It was very much more about talking about things, discussing things, making connections, getting support. Because there's thousands and thousands and thousands of straight venues, and there's hundreds of gay venues, and there might only be one for 200 miles, one bisexual group that meets third Thursday of the month upstairs in the community centre around the back of Woolworths. So it was very much based on this idea of chatting and talking about things. And people come along today and they look at the bisexual community and they go, but this isn't what I was expecting. I've seen images on television initially, and then I've been along too, and I've met people in the gay community, and the gay community is brash and loud and commercial and involves a lot of drinking and smoking. I was expecting the bi community to be like that, but with, you know, sex parties and orgies and all these sorts of things. And that wasn't really the way it was set up, and that's not really the way it's worked ever since. There are sex parties and there are orgies. A lot of that goes on in some of the adjacent communities, like the swinger community and the kink community. Individual ones of those, depending on where you are more or less accepting of bisexual people. But the bi community in the UK very much comes out of a discussion group, trade union feeling, left-wing community centre vibe. After the second Politics of Bisexuality conference, there was a third conference on bisexuality, and around the 6th, they adopted the name BiCon, borrowing the naming convention used in science fiction conventions. And at that point, it was either a conference or a convention, depending on who you talk to. And officially now it's both. Because why offer bisexuals a this or that option? We're always going to say, but what's wrong with and? And is great for us, thank you. So that's a little bit about the history of the bisexual community. Now, if you want to know more, I can recommend 2 books. The first is this one, Bisexual Lives. This was published in 1988. You will have to look on eBay for this. It's quite a long way out of print. And the next is the early 1990s follow-up called Bisexual Horizons, both of which have quite good commentaries on the start of the bisexual community in the UK, and also a look at what being bi was like in the late 80s, early 90s, written by the people who were there. So I arrived in the bi community in 1991, and by then there was a long-established tradition of conferences every year, of there being groups that met regularly. And this brings me to the next question that somebody asked, which was, how has the bisexual community resisted the polarization over trans issues that we've seen in other communities, where there has historically been some initial confusion and ignorance, I think, over trans issues, but there's not been the whole pushback of, but these spaces are for this only. So people who are that, we've decided, don't belong. And I think there's really 2 reasons for this. The first is that the bisexual community has always had trans organizers. Going back to the 80s, with people like Rachel O'Connor, who was very influential, I think, actually running a group called Partners, Bisexuals at Partners, which was in a wine bar in Kennington. By having prominent people in the community who were trans and who were accepted, it made it very difficult to get a foothold in the bi community if you were very transphobic, because the majority of the people were, as one would expect, incredibly grateful that there was a bi group to go to. And so if you turn up saying, oh, well, what do you think about this? You know, these people, meh, 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 they're going to go, well, that's lovely for you, you know, push off, because we are familiar with and we're used to people who are different to us. We are not seeing this as being an us and them situation. And while knowing who counts as being a specific gender is very important to people who rule out sexual partners on a blanket basis because of their gender, straight people, gay people, gender isn't always the highest priority on the list for a bisexual person. And the second thing I think that made a difference is the change that's happened from the older definitions of bisexual that were very much adopted by the community based on what already existed, what was already in the dictionary. You know, we were told before the community started, before we found the community, that bisexual meant attracted by both men and women. And the early bisexual community, of course, was uncertain about this, but wasn't able to say, well, actually, we're going to get behind this other definition. They didn't have one. And so even books like these do heavily talk about how bisexuality is being attracted to both men and women. It wasn't the modern definition wasn't always there. And what happened was, I think, that as people became more aware of gender issues, they realized that they already had a wider community. I've got a comment here from John. Let me add this one up. Bi communities tend to be more accepting of many other differences than just sexual orientation. And you're absolutely right, John. Because we're not a smaller group. There's a lot of bisexual people, but the number of bisexual people who find the bisexual community is quite small because of the institutional blocks we have in society that tell us we needn't bother searching for a bisexual community. We won't find it, so why bother looking? So the people who do persist, particularly in those days, who did persist and kept going to find it, were quite a disparate group. And that meant that when they got together, their differences were quite wild. You know, at a BICON, even from the early ones, you would have a workshop on paganism alongside a workshop on being Christian. You'd have people talking about everything from, you know, parenting and trade unions through to more social stuff about, you know, how to host a bisexual group. There's always been a large kink contingent at larger bi community events, much like there is at any pride. But when these people got together, they thought, well, we have bisexuality in common. We're largely going to set aside all these other differences. So the second thing that happened was the definition changed. And the definition changed to this: attracted to more than one gender. And this also made a difference to not how trans accepting the bi community was, but how difficult it was for transphobes to stay. Because if you want to say, well, my personal definition of bisexuality is that I am attracted to masculine men and feminine women, and some people do, then that definition includes that. But it patently also includes people whose attraction is to all genders, or to non-binary people and women. It doesn't talk about how attracted you are, or it doesn't mention that you don't need to be equally attracted. Why bring that up? The dictionary definition, for all its flaws, never included the words equally, or in the same way, or at the same time. And so I think we've fought against those being there without them actually being there a lot of the time. People put them in their heads. But yeah, that's the reasons why I think, as a non-binary person who came out through being a member of the bi community, why it's not been an issue for a long time. I was looking the other day back through the feedback form report that we made for BICON in 1996, the first year I was an organizer. And it noted that there had been some people bringing up the subject of toilets. And isn't it always that there's some people who bring up the subject of toilets? But in 1996, the official BICON response was, this isn't an issue. People can use whichever toilets they want to. We're not policing this. Get over it. Stop harassing people. And in parts of the LGBT community, it's still an issue in bisexual spaces. It hasn't been for a very long time, partly because we're not gatekeeping based on gender. And we don't gatekeep on other things as well. This is an interesting point, that there's no group that I know of in the UK that's ever run as being bisexual only. They've been bisexual people and their partners and their allies and their friends. Because although if it's you and your partner and you're both gay, then that's easier to make it be about gay only. But bisexual people have bi partners, have straight partners, have gay partners, and we've always included those people. BICON has never been a bi-only space. So this is the reason why I think this has made such a difference to how it's felt inclusive to people, is that the first thing we try to do, isn't turn people away. Now, over the years, we have had a shift in the way BICON has worked, away from the politics of bisexuality. It's a very different event now to how it was then. But that's how it started, and that way it started, I think, is one of the reasons why the bi community endeavours to be as inclusive as it can. It sometimes falls short, and as an organizer, I acknowledge that events I have run have fallen short. But we try harder the next time. Now, the next thing I was asked was about bisexual activism and how a person might get started as a bisexual activist. Now, one of the big secrets of bisexual activism is that there is actually no official bisexual activism exam or standard that you have to aspire to. If you get out there and you do some stuff, you're a bisexual activist. The bar is very low. You probably passed it already if you've done some of the things I'm going to mention now. And so the question is, if you want to get started, what can you do? What can you do? What could you do in 5 minutes? You had just 5 minutes and you wanted to do some bit of activisting. What would you do? And my answer to that would be tweet, share on Facebook, retumble on Tumblr. I don't know what the verb for that is. Post someone's TikTok of themselves wearing a bisexual flag. Take a picture with these colours in. The great thing about the bisexual pride flag is that because it doesn't have a pattern, it's just 1, 2, 3 colours, you can recreate that with so many things. You know, mugs on a shelf, pots of paint on a shelf, golf balls on a shelf, lots of shelf stuff, basically. But do something to signal to other people, hey, there's another bisexual here. Or you could copy down or remember or save on your phone the URL of a helpful website, bisexualindex.org.uk. is particularly helpful. And then when someone asks about, do you know about this bisexual stuff then? Can you give me any suggestions for where to find information? Pass that on to them. Things you can do in 5 minutes will hopefully lead you into what you could do in an hour. If you had an hour to do some activism, what could you do? You could write an extended journal entry about what it's like being bisexual for you, about what your personal definition of bisexuality is, how that fits under the umbrella of attraction to more than one gender. You could post that either with your name on it or anonymously, so that people can read this and feel less alone. In an hour, you could go along to a bisexual group, whether that's in the real world or on Zoom. So many things are at the moment. And even if you say nothing and just sat in the corner with your crochet, whatever, just by being there, it will mean to somebody else that they realize there's more bisexuals out there than they thought, because they turned up and there was 25 people rather than 24, and you've got a hat like theirs, so they feel some kinship with you, and that person's got some, shoes like theirs or whatever, and it's about feeling that connection. And we can do that just by turning up to things, by going along to a BiCon or a BiFest and helping people realize the size of our community. You're being an activist just by being in the crowd shots. In an hour, you could do that. If you could do stuff every month, you could write a newsletter. You could attend a monthly bi group. You could help run that monthly bi group. You could write a series of articles. You could regularly tweet stuff. You could join your workplace LGBT rainbow network. Gay straight alliances, a number of them are called, which is gay, lesbian, and everyone else. I saw one. So they'd have the acronym GLEE. I thought, oh, everyone else. Nice. But you could go along to those meetings. And you could do the thing that you can do every day. And the thing you can do every day to be a bisexual activist is the simplest thing of all. But also, once you get used to it, not so bad. But when you start, maybe the scariest thing you can do every day is be out. Be out as a bisexual person. Talk to people. Tell them you're bisexual and let them have a point of reference for what bisexual people are like. So there we go. We're just approached the half-past mark, so I'm not going to do this for my entire evening. Got my tea to go and eat. But one thing I did want to talk about a bit was what's on, what's coming up. That's the history of the bi community. What's next? It's been a weird year for a lot of us, with the current situation, as we all call it, and today being Freedom Day, means that there's a sense of, when are we going to get back to meeting bisexual people face to face? When are we going to get our community back together? Now, a lot of things have been going on Zoom, in Facebook groups, on mailing lists, all sorts of places, Skype, even maybe Microsoft Teams. And what we want to do is get back to meeting people in the real world. And there's all sorts of things coming up as we get towards September, which of course is Bisexual Awareness Month and contains Bisexual Visibility Day. And I'll try and talk about that a bit more in detail in the next one of these. But there's two things I wanted to tell you about quickly. The first is in a couple of weeks. and that is, I can confirm, you're first to hear it, that Cabaret will be doing a pop-up at Coventry Pride on the 8th of August at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Cabaret is an event that I host, which is specifically bisexual cabaret. So all of the performers are talking about, or singing about, or dancing about, or doing a magic trick about being bisexual. It's important for us to see ourselves at events, to meet people who are like us, but also it's great to have that being visible on stage and to be able to see yourself in the reflection of what's happening under the big lights. So that's Cabaret doing a pop-up in Coventry on the 8th of August. And the other thing is that the first of the things happening in September is that there's going to be a Bisexual Plus community picnic on Saturday, the 11th of September in Hyde Park. You might recognize that date. That date is the same one as Pride in London. It's being organised by a number of bisexual groups, Bisexual Index included, but also B with a T, the Bi Survivors Network, the London Bi Meetup, and Biscuit, as a way of saying we have a community, and our community is a bit tired of the way the mainstream LGBT community fails to deal with things. Now, I'll put a link in the description to all of these, where you can go and find out the details and tick to say you're coming and all that, and also find out the politics behind it. The first bisexual national event in the UK was the politics of bisexuality. And one of the things that I think is important is that we today recognise that there is still a lot of politics in bisexuality. It's not all done. It's not all settled. Some people think we've not moved on at all. But that's because we are still having to explain what bisexuality is to people as they encounter it for the first time. It doesn't matter how many years Battersea Dogs Home has been going, they still have to explain to people that yes, they have cats as well. And so I think the discourse in bisexuality has moved on, but I'm one of the people trying to make sure that when people hear the first thing about bisexuality, that first thing is quite simple. Bisexual just means attracted to more than one gender. So that's it for tonight. Thank you for coming. I look forward to reading all of your comments on the YouTube page. I'll put up the timestamps tomorrow. So any of you who are watching later in the week, or indeed, who knows, in the far distant future, can get straight to the bits you're most interested in. I'm going to try and do one of these a month. Maybe I'll manage it. Maybe I won't. And maybe the next one, I'll even do a magic trick. If you want to see a magic trick, then the best thing you can do, of course, make sure you like and subscribe to this video, because one of the reasons people don't know about bisexuality is bisexual erasure. And the YouTube algorithm really could do with teaching about how bisexuality is a valid topic and how people like you benefit from videos like this. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.